Hello, and welcome to the Arts First podcast. My name is Rachel Jordan, and I'm an artist. And today I'm going to be talking with two other artists about what it means to be a dissident artist in the UK. We'll be hearing about the different art forms that my guests create and why they create them, as well as the types of problems they have faced for simply producing and showing their work. Most importantly, we'll explore why they are dissident artists and the implications of being one. So let me introduce to you the two brave and original artists I have with me today. First, we have Claudia Clare, and secondly, we have Con-She.
Hi.
I'm sure that some of our listeners will be familiar with you or your work, but others may not. So please could you introduce yourselves, telling us about the type of work you make, and also briefly touch on why you make the work you do. Claudia, would you like to go first?
Yes, okay. So I am a potter. So I make clay pots. I hand build them. I paint pictures on them. But this is all in ceramic materials. There's no paint is used in any of my products. It's all ceramic materials. And so they're illustrated pots. Think something like Greek red figureware or English slipware, something like that. But bright colours, and also I trained as a painter. So my most important tool, apart from my hands, is the paintbrush. So I'm using brightly coloured painted pots. So I was always at odds with what I understood to be the art world right from the outset. And that is because I was a feminist from the beginning. And, back in the 1980s, the art world was not enormously welcoming to feminists at all. And nor was it was perhaps even less welcoming to lesbian artists. So I'm used to the idea that I tend minimum to disagree with any dominant narrative or dominant discourse I might perceive as being present.
Thank you. And also your pots also have messages on them.
Do you mean in actual written text?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I mean, they vary a lot, actually. I recently did a project with an organisation called Women at the Well, which it's a women-only service. It's based in King's Cross in London, provides support to women in prostitution. They asked me to illustrate the accounts of the women that they support. Now, most of those are actually pictorial. I sometimes smash pots and piece them back together again. I mean, that is actually relatively simple material metaphor, I think is the best way to call it, which is, it's an illustration of that expression people often use. I was shattered, and then I started piecing myself back together. So it's just a kind of metaphor for trauma and recovery. And that's as messagey as those ones get. But I also did another set of pots for that project, which was in response to a report by Julie Bindel, which was about language used by academics and often journalists to describe the sex trade. And that was text heavy, so that was quite challenging because I originally I did slogan art, I guess, in the 1980s. Sometimes when I look at that, I think, oh my God, it's really toe curling. And then I see loads of artists, like pottery artists now, relatively new to it, doing exactly the same thing. And I think, oh my God. But anyway.
Almost like craftivism.
Yeah, exactly.
Big slogan here.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting thing to take on because I thought, how can I make this more interesting? How can I, develop this idea of the text pot, the slogan pot? There is a long history of text on pots as well. And sometimes I actually now have quite a collection of jug rhymes. Some of them are I can't cope with calling myself a poet. So I just call them jug rhymes because they are rhyming. And they were designed to be read out loud when drunk in a pub. That was,
I see.
They're pub jugs for pouring beer. They were that sort of thing.
Brilliant. Thank you for that very fascinating description. Con-She, how about you? What can you tell us about your work?
Yeah, well, Con-She is a kind of constructed character, quite kind of arch in response to all this, really, so I could be kind of free to make the kind of work I wanted to make and not get even more cancelled than I already was. And it was a way for me to work out my own trauma from it all as well, really. So the character itself is a kind of subversion of the Pierrot archetype, but it's a kind of Glaswegian booze and fags Pierrot. And I make various kind of satirical pieces about the current climate. So one of my first pieces was a kind of scold's bridle, and there was kind of leather bound all over the woman's face. And then on it are these kind of childlike, sweetie letters spelling out all the words that replace women, like menstruator and womb haver and that kind of thing. And then it has a kind of ball gag, and the ball gag is papier-mâché made out of all the names of the people following the TERFs Out of Art Twitter account, for example. So yeah, I think things like that. I did a video piece recently called Walking on Eggshells, where visitors to the gallery are kind of forced to break eggshells in order to go in, and me and my mad clown guys is kind of chasing after them, yelling at them to be kind through a megaphone, and then they get presented with the reward of a woke cookie upon entering the gallery. So it's all quite sort of silly in one way, but very disturbing and uncomfortable, and very much kind of metaphorical stuff about the era in which we're trying to function at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I've watched the video where you're yelling, be kind at visitors, and it's truly, truly frightening, but it makes the point brilliantly. Thank you. So let's move on to the question of what it means to be a dissident artist and how it does affect the type of work that you make. But before you answer, let's think for a moment about how this term dissident artist has been used historically. When I was planning the podcast, I remembered that the phrase dissident artist was something that we used to hear quite a lot in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. And usually this phrase was used about artists from Russia, or as it was known then, the Soviet Union. For example, the incredible ballet dancer Rudolf Nureyev was a world-famous dissident artist who defected from the Soviet Union to the West so that he could escape communism and live in a democratic and free society. And this was very big news at the time. For him, he felt compelled to escape the rules of his home country, and he broke free whilst he was on a dance tour to Paris in 1961. I mean, he actually broke free. You know, he ran away from the KGB. Of course, these days, the term dissident artist is still used, but it's more often for artists from places like China, with the best one from there being, the best known one being Ai Weiwei. So what I'm wondering is, obviously you're both based in the UK. Do you feel like you are breaking away from something? And if so, from what? And how important is freedom to making your work?
I didn't actually ever feel, I didn't until very recently indeed, feel as though I was breaking away from anything. And I do think that that's because I first entered the art world, we can even call it that, understanding that I was at odds with what the art world seemed to me to be presenting and representing. So I was always a slightly detached, a bit separate. So I think all of my involvement with the art world, right from when I first started exhibiting, which was, I suppose, in the mid-1990s, I was a little bit towards the end of the 80s, but I didn't really start exhibiting it with any seriousness until the mid-1990s. And so it was always on that basis. But what I then found, it was 2010 was when I first was advised that I would have a piece of work removed from an art gallery. And this was Bradford Metropolitan Museum's Cartwright Hall. It was actually Keighley Castle was the gallery that I was supposed to be having a show in. Now, I kind of argued ferociously to get it reinstated. As luck would have it, they'd used an image of that particular piece, Princess Hymen, on their publicity. So I managed to win that argument, but I also had quite good support from a rather well-known curator in the area, Nima Smith, and also the local paper. Those were the days, So I don't think you'd get that now. Also, I mean, apart from anything else, local papers were functioning properly. They were actually doing their job. So I think, that I got it partially reinstated, but it was hidden. So this has been part and parcel of my existence as an artist. I then had work removed from a gallery in 2016. I was then started getting on this treadmill of things being cancelled, invitations revoked, so on and so. I mean, it goes on and on and on. The hounding started in 22. I mean, the hounding started in 2020, actually. I just didn't really know about it. But, it's been going on for so long. It's very difficult. I don't know what I'd be breaking away from anymore. The only thing is that when I said very recently, I kind of do mean in the past 2 to 3 months, because I have just closed my studio and retreated home. I now have a 2x2 cabin in my garden, which I'm in right now. I am, in the most literal sense of the word, returning to the drawing board. Now, it's also because I've had a big change in family circumstances, and I got my granddaughter and daughter-in-law from Iran now living with me. So it's all kind of big change. Timing's good from my point of view. But it does mean that I have no idea where I am in the art world right now, if at all. I'd have to sort of say in a year from now, I don't even know. I said I was a potter. I'm still using the email. So, I'm still, all my website is geared towards my being a potter. And I'm thinking, maybe I'm an ex-potter. I don't know. I hope not. But I'm not in a position to make pots for a year. I did train doing drawing, painting, printmaking, and I have always loved work on paper, and I miss it. I've been wanting to get back to it for a long time. And as I think I said earlier, my pots are illustrated. So that's not really a new thing. So it's an evolution. So I may have broken free from the art world, but I'm not quite sure how or what direction it's going to take.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Con-She, do you feel like you are breaking away from something? And if so, from what? And how important is freedom to you in your work?
Yes, all of that. So thinking about what you were saying about dissident artists and how in today's world, the artistic establishment would be on the side of the people who are doing the oppressing and the authoritarian regimes, and not the dissidents who are protesting. They don't care at all about, oppressive regimes abroad. They're in this strange world of inversion, which is one of the things that fascinates me and puts me on the back foot all the time. I'm someone who feels a tremendous responsibility, to use a Ponce phrase, towards epistemic responsibility. I think we have a responsibility to track truth with our theories, and watching, all of the world, but the art world particularly, spin further and further away into this kind of bizarre postmodernist place that's kind of unmoored from reality, where what you have is like loads of middle-class kids of doctors and lawyers claiming great oppression. They're all playing oppression Spartacus. I'm more oppressed, and none of them are oppressed at all. And the whole thing it sends you bonkers. You're in a clown car the whole time. So there's that kind of escape from what all of that is. And then on the kind of personal front, again, I don't want to delve too deeply into my story, but I was on long-term disability benefits, unable to work. I'd made things all of my life. I kept making things. And eventually I kind of landed up professionalizing through disability arts. And then in tandem, I was trying to curate free speech type things and getting clobbered for it and being really naive about how impossible it was, around 2019, 2020 already to do that. And also finding myself this kind of weird ping pong in this game of identity politics where institutions wanted to work with me so they could tick their box that they've worked with a disabled artist, not realizing that that's like the flip side of the coin of like, actually my work is good. You could work with me for that reason. And then the kind of, laughable things like palpable disappointment that I'm not a nice decorative wheelchair user that they can kind of promote on their social media as terribly visually disabled. All this kind of farcical crap, and the whole thing just brought me to breakdown basically. And so trying to navigate my way through it and trying to rebel against, all of it, all of the bullshit of like the mainstream art stuff, and then the people who think they're the outsiders, like the disability art slot. And it's all this kind of bizarre Pied Piper world of farce that I have to find a way to puncture somehow and make work about and kind of laugh at.
Yeah, you're right in the way you describe the complexity of it, and how you navigate through that is, it's a real, it's like doing an impossible jigsaw puzzle, really, isn't it? Okay, so if we carry on thinking about being a dissident and the kind of risks that involves, because you two have already now mentioned the sort of challenges you've faced, having your work removed, not getting opportunities, being hounded out of places. You see, originally, or in this other definition of dissident artists, it's usually the government that is pursuing artists, either maybe arresting them, putting them in prison, or the artists themselves choose to go into exile because the conditions are so intolerable. But obviously something very different is happening these days. So where would you say the sort of authoritarianism is coming from? What kind of groups, posing these risks to you in terms of showing your work or even making your work?
Institutions, individuals, people describing themselves as activists. I want to start with institutions. I still feel I personally feel most scandalized by something that happened via me to somebody else. And I was invited to talk about my work on a 2-person panel in a major art institution, a Quango, based in London. So this is an institution where the CEO is a government appointee. All of the trustees have to be approved by government. This is an absolutely explicitly non-neutral space, And the woman that organized the event, that included me, was advised that she was investigated by HR for, and I quote, not conducting due diligence and exposing the audiences of this particular museum to my dangerous ideas. The dangerous idea in question was there's no such thing as a lesbian with a penis. That's how dangerous that was, Now, whichever way you look at it, that is at least government, but that's partially government approach. That's HR. These people have .gov in their email, So this is not a small thing. Well, I described earlier about Bradford. Now I have to say, I don't want to be too hard on Bradford. They were very decent about it. Ultimately, I mean, it was what they did was the wrong thing, but at least they talked about it. It was discussed, right? But that as well is part of local government. So we just can't forget these museums that are doing this. It was UAL that expelled me from Ceramic Art London. University of the Arts London was one of the biggest art teaching institutions on the planet. Again, it's just not a small thing. And I mean, also my trade organisation, which isn't exactly how, they've handled it very badly in my view. But
what is the name of that trade organisation?
That's the Craft Potters Association. Now, actually, part of it was that they got hounding and they got pressure from their own members. Very, very few members. We're talking 2 or 3, and one person isn't even a member, but has, that you've got influential figures, what we now call influencers, Instagram type people. So it's a vast kind of gamut of it's a big range of individuals, of people, some of whom are really at the top level, who are just colluding, most of whom we don't even agree with. They're saying things they don't believe. That's appalling. That is Soviet, actually.
Yeah.
That is Soviet behavior, is when you start spouting things they don't even believe. And I know damn well they don't believe it. You have the Chancellor of UAL is Grayson Perry, a massive turf. Everybody knows that. But he refused to stand with J.K. Rowling. Why? Because he didn't want the shaming. He's not going to be affected money-wise. That's about shaming.
Yeah.
So that's fear. And not a well-founded fear either. It's and okay, sorry,
Yeah.
Your turn, Con-She.
No, it's fine. Con-She, you say.
So I agree with a lot of that, and perhaps my experience is slightly skewed in a different direction to Claudia, because in some ways I disagree in that my experience isn't of I'd actually feel more optimistic if I was finding lots of people who were kind of just parroting the propaganda, because then you have what you have in other sectors, which is that there's a big leading vocal minority, a lot of kind of zombified followers who can be pushed one way or the other depending on how the wind blows. in my experience, and because I am working with a very particular sector, so kind of disability arts and the kind of institutions who are very woke and very into kind of even more woke than the rest of the art world kind of thing. But I'm dealing with wall-to-wall true believers. That's what frightens me is not that it's not propaganda. It's that they really have the kind of light of terrifying zealousness, and they believe I'm a bigot. They absolutely do. They were my friends, and they know me, and they will decry me. And I don't think they're doing it disingenuously. The whole world has been kind of led into this bizarre Manichaean religion where, you must believe everything to within 1 millimeter of what the other people around you believe, or you are evil. And I think they believe it.
So it's interesting there you mentioned friends, Con-She. What exactly has caused them, do you think, to change from being a friend to suddenly seeing you as this persona non grata?
Yeah, I mean, that's across the board, across my professional life as well as in my personal life. And that's been one of the really devastating things, I think. And you sort of think, why would they think that? But then also on the macro scale, why would they think a bunch of lefty feminists for however many decades have metamorphosized into raging bigots overnight? Like, why does that seem likely to people? So, I don't know. And I suppose I've come to the conclusion in a kind of slightly anthropological sense that humans are just human, and most of them are fairly tribal. And when someone is one of those strange people who kind of just is more interested in truth than in belonging, they will get chucked out even by the nicest people in the world because that's how most people work cognitively.
So there's an element of groupthink.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, but I also think groupthink is a kind of way to slightly pejoratively describe something that's just a kind of facet of the evolutionary development of mankind. We live in groups of 150, and tribal affiliation and bonding is important. And those kind of little wrestlings between the free thinkers who might change things for the better or being so free thinking that they're disrupting things and have to be chucked out. These are the little pageantries that are being played out, I think.
Okay. So obviously this is all quite heavy and far-reaching in terms of how it affects your career, the way you operate as an artist, whether you can actually get your work shown anywhere on a personal level with friends and family. Have there been points where you've thought, why am I making the work that I make? Why don't I just give up doing it and make something that's, inoffensive? Does it make you feel like either you should just retreat and do something different, or does it strengthen your resolve, Claudia?
For me, I mean, not really either. I mean, I just carry on doing what I'm doing. So in that sense, it hasn't really changed. I mean, I have always made work, actually, that is profoundly inoffensive, because I've always made pots, with sort of trees and roses and landscapes and things on. I can't be hardcore all the time. I need a break. Yeah. Everybody needs a break.
Sure.
So it's never really been like that. I've always had a very varied output in that respect. And it's quite kind of tiring. I mean, I do have to be sort of, I've got to generate the energy to land some interesting, forceful attacks on things like religious fundamentalism, on the men's violence to women, on, rape, the sex trade and gender, and, the whole theory around transgenderism in particular. I have to really, some of that stuff is quite complex. It has to be thought through with some care. So, that takes time, it takes energy. And once it starts to flow, it'll come with some degree of fluency. But I mean, another reason why I'm taking this year out, I mean, there's many, many reasons. One is my rent went through the roof. Another, as I said, a change in circumstances. But the other is I need a break. I'm exhausted. I feel like I've been going at it hammer and tongs since, well, as I said, since 2011, really. 2010, I mean. Well, no, earlier than that, because my PhD shattered was a response, making these gigantic 2-meter high pots, which were women's responses to, which were a response to women's experiences of surviving sexual violence. And the one I talked about, Princess Hyman, that was actually an attack on virginity culture generally. but also because, I guess, partly because of having close friends and now family in Iran, that's made me much more sort of conscious and conscientious, actually, about wishing to attack some of the things that directly oppress them.
Yeah,
And have a major impact on us women here as well. I don't
sure.
think migrant women, I mean.
Yeah.
Um,
Con-She, how about you?
Don't give it up. No, not at all. I suppose in a funny sort of way, I did withdraw in creating the character, because what I found around sort of 2020, 2021 was that the 5 years of it all had driven me to breakdown. I'd just become two people who was pretending to believe one set of things in order to try and play the game and get funding, and realizing even the drop downs in the forms are what you self-identify as, and there's this kind of bizarre tyranny of petty bureaucracy that just takes over your free will to kind of not agree with this stuff. And so in a funny sort of way, in order to have my situation not get any more dire than it already was, and I won't go into the details of that, I kind of thought I've become two people anyway at this point, and I'm an absolute wreck mental health wise, so I am just going to become two people. And maybe in some people's eyes that is a fun giving up in a funny sort of way, although I continue to make work about this in a more subtle way as my kind of real self, and then I get the kind of outlet in this guise, and no, I mean, I'm not interested in making work about anything else. I'm completely and utterly fascinated and obsessed by this period in time, these sociological changes. I have like 100 pieces in my head that I want to make. So I've just finished a piece involving binders, and the next thing I'm going to start work on is a kind of short artistic response to it's a combination response to the work on the Fourth Plinth, along with Maria Balshaw's recent little tome that we have been favoured with. So yeah, no, I'm not going to stop. I can't stop. This consumes me, I think.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think both of you, your resilience is very admirable and impressive. But if we just finally look at the way in which these conditions, as you've both outlined, and as we know, they are quite new. Society wasn't like this 30 years ago. Artists didn't get challenged in the same way for making work on the themes that you're dealing with. So in his essay, Why I Write, by George Orwell, he explained that he wrote what he wrote because he was responding to conditions of his time. He said, I live in a peaceful age. I might have written ornate or merely descriptive books, and might have remained almost unaware of my political loyalties. As it is, I've been forced into becoming a sort of pamphleteer. In other words, it's very true to say that art is not produced in a vacuum, and often artists are responding directly to events happening in society. But can you, as a final thought, can you imagine a time when the art world here is far less politicized, and where you would be making maybe different work, and you wouldn't be facing these kinds of challenges? Claudia?
Not really. I mean, I think, to be honest, the art world actually has always been politicized. I don't think there's ever really been a golden age I think the art world has always been slightly politicized, or, to a greater or lesser extent. I don't think there's ever really been a golden age. Apart from anything else, one can politicize almost anything. I did want to say, I think it might matter. I remember the 1980s very well, and I remember when Lubena Hamid and Lord Salter set up all sorts of pressure groups and organisations where they were really started to promote Black women artists. And I think there's no doubt those women, you only have to look at the quality of the work that they were producing way back then, never mind now, and really realise the extent to which they were certainly excluded. And when you kind of read I knew Maud Salter reasonably well for a short period of time. She represented me in her art gallery. When I read through some of the documents that she left, she died in 2008. She certainly, and I think both of them, she and Lubena, for the work that they were doing, trying to push against the sort of established kind of bias, the established networking that existed in the art world, where, she spoke earlier about groups of people who are networked, we live in groups of about 150 people. And but the art world's no different. It was like that. So they really had to push very hard to break through. And they had a lot of pushback. I remember Nina Edge being constantly told she was just too angry, and to this and to that, and certainly Maud was too. I mean, it was a battle for them, and so I think that has always been. So I know I can't imagine it, and I think I'll always be a part of it one way or another.
Okay, thank you. Con-She.
That's fascinating to me because I'm thinking, I think the same all the time, that these battles were something that were very, very real, and now they're kind of LARPed and fetishized and pantomimed, and that's such a disservice to the people who were actually fighting those battles at the time, to create this silly parody play in order for people to negotiate this kind of superficial intersectional grift that we have now. What kind of thumbing your nose at those artists like Salter and Hamid and Nina Edge. What was the original question? Oh, will it be less politicized? Yeah, I mean, it's partly about the overt politicization of the type of art they're willing to show. So it all has to be about, power differentials and who's oppressed and who's not and stuff. So it's very, very beige at the moment. That's what the man is. But also I think the kind of more sinister politicization of you have to be someone like us in order to participate at all. So even if you were making, really, a lot of what I do is actually just really beautiful, sensory, quite non-political art as my real self. And actually it's still not going to get shown because I'm not the right person. And actually, if I was going to use my own intersectional grift, I'd get on a lot better. But I find it also vomit-inducing that I resist that and don't. So yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I think there's a kind of tragedy where the people who are the dissidents inevitably become the man. And that's partly why the people in the establishment are completely unaware of the fact that they're the establishment, apparently. So yeah.
Yeah, there's been a real twist. Okay, well, thank you very much for your contribution to the discussion today. I'm sure the listeners have found it interesting and will want to check out your work on your respective websites. Is there anything that any last word you would like to say, or any show coming up that you want to mention?
I wish. I'm not aware, I really have no idea what's going on at the moment. I curated a show in the summer, Vice and Virtue, which Con-She was in, actually. I'd love to do some more of that, of curating. I think it's worth mentioning the difference between the private sector and the public sector. Private sector sort of middle market galleries, now you're not going to make a living that way. It can be expensive to show with them. But I think it may be an underused option for artists like us, because a lot of them are actually, they're run by these quite sort of punchy women who aren't willing to take this on, who do have some commitment to freedom of expression and do know what it means. So I think it's part of the reason, I stopped showing in the public sector in 2010. And it does have a disastrous effect on your career. There's no doubt you lose profile if you're just with the private sector. But at least you keep going. At least through the private sector, you can sell your work. It's an income of sorts.
Yeah.
It'll pay for the studio at least, or did until very recently. So it's don't give up yet.
Thank you. Great final words there from Claudia. Con-She, how about you? Any plans for the future?
So I have ongoing plans. Back in sort of 2021-ish, I started trying to put together a show of curated together cancelled female artists' work, which I think would be a great show to do. But as it got sort of bigger, it requires a bit of funding, and we've struggled to figure out how to get that funding. So if anybody knows anybody who might be willing to contribute to a kind of bit of an up yours to show the kind of work of all the cancelled artists who are not getting shown, then please get in touch.
Definitely. That would be a show that I'm sure, I know I would like to see, and I'm sure our listeners would like to as well.
Thanks for listening to Arts First. You can subscribe and listen to all our episodes at our Substack. That's at artsfirst.uk. Or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or our YouTube channel. If you want to give us a like or review us on any of those channels, then that would be a great help. And if you'd like to help with a donation, then please see our Substack donations page. We'll see you next time.